You are listening to a podcast from The Hindu.
I am Jacob Koshi.
And I'm Shobna Nair, and this is the
Rearview. Here we dive into the history of things, events, discoveries, and inventions.
Starry, starry night. Paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on a summer's day with eyes that know the darkness in my soul.
Today's episode, we have a tragic hero, unlike all our previous episodes which spoke about triumphs.
A scientist tragic hero.
Our protagonist in this episode is Dr. Subhash Mukherjee. Dr. Mukherjee was the doctor credited with developing the technique of IVF, which led to India's first test tube baby, Kanupriya Agarwal, on 3rd October 1978. This was a mere 67 days after world's first test tube baby, Louis Joy Brown.
Now I understand what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity.
Don McLean's Vincent, lovely song. And the parallels to Vincent van Gogh and Dr. Mukherjee are fairly uncanny. Because much like Vincent van Gogh, Dr. Mukherjee never got the recognition that he deserved during his lifetime. Not only did he not get any encouragement, he was actively humiliated by the scientist and medical community of his time. And it was this that probably played a major role in his unfortunate decision to hang himself at the age of 50. Of course, Vincent van Gogh was 37 when he fatally shot himself. But what is common to both of them was a store of unrealized potential that was cut short.
Yeah, so Jacob, while of course Dr. Mukherjee did not have the happy ending that he deserved, but he did give hope for a joyous life to several millions of couples who now enjoy the freedom and the choice of having in vitro
IVF
fertilization.
is such a big booming business, and it is all, and as you mentioned, the techniques that is now standard today were very much similar to what he had pioneered then.
They would not listen, they did not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now.
So, Jacob, before we get into Dr. Mukherjee's story, give us a very brief biographical sketch of the man. Who was he?
So Shobna, he was born to a doctor family in Calcutta. So he was born on the 16th December 1931 in Hazaribagh, then Bihar, but now Jharkhand. And his father, Satyendranath Mukherjee, was a well-known radiologist in Calcutta of the time. He earned his MBBS from the National Medical College, Calcutta, and he was clearly a very committed and passionate researcher because he earned two PhD degrees. Both his PhDs are kind of related to this larger research interest in in reproductive in the reproductive sciences, and he did not just remain a doctor who just consulted patients. He was somebody who was actively involved in research, finding out new therapies. In fact, the place where he did his PhD, his second PhD, Edinburgh, the Edinburgh University, was also where Robert Edwards.
Yes, Jacob, don't complete that sentence. Let me
I stopped
first
short.
let me first introduce why Edinburgh is important, and but for that, I need to introduce a second character, Dr. Robert Edwards. It is unlikely that Dr. Mukherjee or Dr. Edwards met each other in their lifetime. But unknowingly, both of them were working towards the same goal, almost parallelly to each other, around the same time.
In fact, there is a suggestion that they might have met because the Indian Council of Medical Research had established a reproductive health organization, and it had organized a symposium in Bombay in 1971. And apparently, Edwards came to this symposium, as did Dr. Mukherjee. But yes, we don't know if they actually talked and met.
Yeah, it is. But the other similarity between the two is the Edinburgh University, where both of them studied. Both of them obtained their doctorate from the Edinburgh University. So we are introducing Dr. Robert Edwards because he, along with the British gynecologist Patrick Steptoe, worked closely to develop in vitro fertilization, and the world's first, and it was this team which was behind the world's first IVF baby, Louis Joy Brown, who was born on July 25th, 1978 at Oldham General Hospital in Greater Manchester, United Kingdom. Now, her birth marked a groundbreaking movement in medical history, as she was the first human conceived, through, conceived in a petri dish
Literally outside of a body.
of the mother's body. And it had never ever been done. And obviously there was the specter of Frankenstein's monster, and all those ethical issues surrounding the birth. Jacob, so tell me one thing. So, and as I just said right in the introduction, that India's first IVF baby was also born
In the same year,
just 67 days after Louis Joy Brown.
in 2010, Dr. Robert Edwards went on to get the Nobel Prize. Of course, people say that was really, really delayed, nearly 30 years after his after the birth of Joy Brown. And in all fairness, and this is the first bit of the tragedy in Dr. Mukherjee's story. If things had panned out really well the way they were, it was very likely that Dr. Mukherjee would definitely have been a co-credit, would have also been a would have got the same Nobel Prize, and India would have had its for another scientific Nobel laureate after C.V. Raman for doing work in India. That would have been major, and this is a big, big miss that is almost never talked about. Dr. Edwards had been working on the question of of human reproduction, looking at the various hormones and the various biochemical changes that happen during pregnancy. He did a lot of his work in the 50s regarding on rats, on rabbits. He did a lot of his work on understanding the process of reproduction in rabbits, and he soon realized that fertilization outside the body could represent a possible treatment of infertility. So he decided to translate this, the learnings from rabbits into human cells. I mean, through his work, he had identified how human eggs mature, how different hormones regulate their maturation, and at which point the eggs are susceptible to the fertilizing sperm. The thing with something like in vitro fertilization is the methods. How do you actually, at what particular stages, you introduce the eggs? How to actively extract the eggs? He tried to use gonadotrophic hormones, and this is a hormone that is released from the pituitary gland. I mean, that stimulates the life cycle of of the reproductive process. So that is a key hormone. And when he tried to use it, the eggs maturation did not happen successfully, and even the embryos did not work well. In fact, he had to use. I mean, if he had to use another complete set of injections, which are actually fairly painful, to stimulate this life cycle. Now, where Mukherjee came in was he came up with this idea, which is now standard and which is which is kind of obvious. He used the gonadotrophin, but figured out that you have to just take the embryos that were stimulated in this way and freeze them, or cryopreservation as they call it. And you freeze them and you introduce them, at an appropriate time during the reproductive life cycle. He also pioneered another method of actually extracting the eggs, from the body. So, in fact, Dr. Edwards had to take the help of another skilled gynecologist called Patrick Steptoe. He was the guy who pioneered, again, the now common intervention called laparoscopy. But in fact, Steptoe had used the laparoscope to remove eggs from the ovaries. Edwards put the eggs in a cell culture, added sperm, did all that. But Dr. Mukherjee, because he was, I don't know, maybe he did not have the resources or the kind of institutional support that Edwards had. Edwards was working in Cambridge at the Molecular Research Center. He actually used a very clever method of transvaginal extraction, where and this was,
And a more simpler method,
a more simple method. In fact,
sustainable method.
doctors actually say this was actually so obvious that why didn't other people think of it? Beggars belief. So he used both of these methods, and he did all of this work on entirely independent of Edwards. If you don't know what kind of, uh, uh, of course they were at Edinburgh. They did not personally know each other, I guess, but obviously they were reading the same, established journals. Edwards was a far more established researcher, so a lot of
He
his
was
work.
also a very public figure, Edwards,
Absolutely, yeah.
because okay, there is while we are at it, I do want to make a movie recommendation. I would highly recommend everybody should watch Joy on Netflix, which actually tells the story of the nurse Joy
Let
who
me add,
worked.
not the Jennifer Lawrence Joy.
No, not the Jennifer, because obviously when I recommended this to Jacob, the intelligent man that he is, he went to Netflix and he was looking at Jennifer Lawrence.
And I didn't look any further.
Exactly. We need to go into the details. But anyways, do watch Joy.
Mr. Steptoe will be an excellent member of our team.
This team, which you've not yet explained to me.
Oh, we're going to help make babies.
Making babies in test tubes.
You truly believe you can do that?
We're making the impossible possible. We are. You'll see.
It was about the nurse who was associated with Dr. Steptoe. Dr. Steptoe and Dr. Edwards on this project, and it tells us the story of the birth of Louise Joy Brown. One of the greatest innovation done by Dr. Mukherjee was the cryopreservation of the embryos. After fertilization in the petri dish, he froze the resulting embryos using liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees. This allowed him to preserve the embryos until the mother's uterine lining was optimally prepared for implantation. And this is the method which is used till date. Cryopreservation was actually a significant departure from the UK method, where Edwards and Steptoe transferred a fresh embryo directly. We are a country of jugaad, and Mukherjee was working under severe constraints and with very, very limited resources. For cryopreservation, he used a refrigerator compressor
Yeah,
to do the
not
cryopreservation.
even a full proper fridge.
Yeah, can you imagine? That is so spectacular.
But this is India, where this was the 70s, where having a full-fledged fridge was also, I guess, a luxury. So this was the method this was the approach that Dr. Mukherjee took, and he tried this out. What is from all the known sources, he tried out on only one couple, and these were the Agrawals. They were a family in Calcutta, and Mrs. Agrawal, she was somebody who had failed to conceive even 15 years after her marriage. And social circumstances were such that it was believed that because she couldn't conceive, I mean, it was affecting. She wanted to be a mother, so they approached Dr. Mukherjee, and he offered them this method, but also told them that, look, this is something that has never been done before, particularly in India. He said there were also risks that the baby might be born abnormally. So, do you still want to go ahead? And they agreed, and Dr. Mukherjee actually, did all of this, these new methods, and went about this process, and turned out to be successful. I mean, on October 3rd, you had Kanupriya Agrawal, as she was officially called, a healthy baby girl born, and she was also named Durga. I mean, who really named her Durga, or was she named Durga informally? But she was born. It, it it was during the Durga Puja season festival in Bengal, and which is why they kind of that was why how the name was given. But unlike the movie and Joy Brown, where the first test tube baby's picture was put up in the newspapers and was a well publicized debate, this was done secretly. I mean, there was no public acknowledgement that this girl, Kanupriya Agrawal or Durga, was a test tube baby. Her parents never disclosed that in any public forum. This does not mean that the news wasn't known.
Calcutta Doordarshan flashed the news of birth of India's first and world's second test tube baby on Tuesday, 3rd October 1978 at 11:44 a.m.
No details of the person disclosed, of course.
And the newspapers next day also carried,
It was like big news. I mean,
yeah,
imagine having
flashed
reporting a
across.
story with that, and plus, so close after the world's first test tube baby was born.
And Jacob, the reason why we are discussing Dr. Mukherjee's story is because of the very tragic end that he had. Uh,
And everything began, and everything happened within a month. I
yeah,
mean,
what
just
should have been the high point of his life turned out to be the point where it all unraveled. His life just went awry. And initially, so how was Dr. Mukherjee's announcement received, Jacob? If you could take us through that.
initially things looked good for Dr. Mukherjee. So he presented his findings in several scientific fora. He went to, there was a International Congress on Hormonal Steroids that was held in Delhi from 29th October 1978, where there were in attendance, practitioners and doctors from Cornell Medical School, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He went at another forum where there were scientists from Harvard. He gave a public lecture at Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi. He was also interviewed by, among others, Dr. G.P. Talwar, who was a former head of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, one of the most foremost medical researchers. He made a presentation at the Indian Science Congress. That in its heydays, that was the fora where medical experts and scientists presented new findings. This was in 1979. So it wasn't as if other scientists weren't aware of his work. But this is where things started to go awry, because his reports first came to the media. I mean, in one way, it was similar to what happened in the UK, because it was an intensive media spectacle also. But even in India, he did not have a formal scientific publication explaining this. So, in all of the explanation that he was giving, there were other medical practitioners. For example, there was a Dr. Tarun Banerjee, who was a leading gynecologist in the Calcutta Medical College, and he, as quoted by newspapers, said that there should be a scientific discussion in detail about the three methods: collecting ovum from mother's ovaries, fertilization of the ovum, and pushing it back into the mother's uterus. These are very complex procedures. His point was that there should be a proper evaluation on how these methods were done.
That Dr. Mukherjee should have been perhaps more transparent about his
Not
findings
only
and
that, because
supply
the
with the
standard
data.
practice is that whenever you advance something new, you first announce it via a peer-reviewed medical journal. Now, apparently, Dr. Mukherjee was working towards this, but the government of West Bengal appointed an expert committee under the Indian Medical Association, West Bengal chapter, and Bengal Obstetrics and Gynecology Association to investigate the claims made by Mukherjee and his colleagues in a brief report sent to them in 19th October 1978. So this was literally 2 or 3 weeks. Things were moving fairly fast. Now, interestingly, this committee was headed by a professor of radiophysics and who was assisted by a gynecologist, a physiologist, and a neurophysiologist. Now, reproductive technologies were, as it is, a very new form of science, medical science. So it wasn't very clear why a committee of people who were not all proven experts in in reproductive technologies was constituted. And he said during this they conducted an inquiry where he put up all of his all of the work that he had done, but he had left out certain crucial details. For example, what is the exact exact composition of the liquid called DMSO, the timing of freezing it, because this is a very procedure heavy method. I mean, you have to detail everything. He did not actively publicize that because his reasoning was that he wanted to publish all of this in a peer reviewed journal. He was preparing it for this. And but in the meantime, he was asked to scramble with a report for 2 weeks. Now, getting a journal especially in those times, getting a medical report published in a leading journal, sending it for review, peer comments, usually is a process that takes weeks and months because you have to send stuff by hand, right? But they asked him to come up these things with a report in 2 weeks. And this he is quoted as saying that, I have to be careful to gather unpublished data because by the time I became aware of the penetrating efficiency of the tentacles of the mass media.
There
So
we
that's a
have
slap
it
on our face.
again, again and again. We are slapped quite
Always.
regularly.
That's part of this professional hazards, I guess. And there was also it was Calcutta of the 1970s. So there was a different vibe around that.
Yeah, obviously, Jacob, this was not the Calcutta of the British era, where it was no longer the glittering capital of the British Empire. Instead, it was just one another city of a new republic, and there was a lot of deprivation around. And obviously, Jacob, there is an important thing that we should mention here, because this is the time when India as a new republic is still trying to find its footing, still trying to feed its millions, still trying to provide infrastructure, schooling, and everything. The
This is
emphasis
70s. Overpopulation is the
over
big bad word around.
exactly the point. The emphasis is not on uh, bringing new children into the world. Rather, the emphasis was bringing new devices to stop having children.
This better contraceptives, the
Yes.
whole Nasbandi things of the
Campaign and
70s. Yeah. And then you come up with, and so this, in fact, this was actually a similar kind of problems that, Dr. Edwards had faced in the UK. Though, to his credit, he had actually gone about these matters in a very systematic way. Even prior to the birth of Brown and all his procedures, he actively had written several articles discussing the ethics of bringing in new life. It's actually very, very similar to the modern day debate about, genetically engineered life forms and the ethics of it is very similar to that.
Yeah, I think the difference, while Dr. Mukherjee sort of stole a march in terms of innovations in the methodology, Dr. Edwards had a sound ground to tread on, because he was extremely transparent, and he had published his findings at every stage, and he was not just addressing the mass media. He was giving to television interviews. He had invited television cameras into the birthing, I mean the place where Louis Joy Brown was born, but also he was engaging uh, with the scientific community every step of the way.
In retrospect, I wonder, uh, did Dr. Mukherjee kind of rush too early to the media? Was it because there was already the birth of of Joy Brown announced in the UK, and I guess Mrs. Bela Agrawal was already in the last trimester, of her pregnancy. So what if this, because as we came to know subsequently, Durga's, the existence of a test tube baby and her energy was never revealed, to the public. What if he had just stayed silent, published his findings, put it in a research journal, and just gone about it and then there wouldn't have been this inquiry by the West Bengal government. So it's all the what if moment, and it's also the nature of the science of reproductive technology. I mean, this was not just lab research that's happening. That where this process is followed. This is live human beings, and this is too big. Uh, so I guess he took
I
the
mean,
decision that he did.
one cannot conclusively say what could have happened. Of course, it's a what if movement here, but it is. I mean, I can understand Dr. Mukherjee's predicament. The fact that he had been working in dismal conditions for so long, and then suddenly you're told, oh, by the way, the thing that you're working on has already been done. So I can imagine the pressure on
We
him.
would feel if our precious stories are scooped by somebody.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, but this happened, and the West Bengal government was clearly the committee was clearly not impressed by his reports. They actively, I mean, short of saying that he was almost fraudulent, they said they found his reports,
with
unbelievable.
yeah, with many gaps, as he himself has confessed.
Yes, as he, though to be fair, it's also begs to it is a little hard to understand why the West government committee just said okay, take 3 more months, publish it somewhere, and then we should review it again, as is the standard practice now. So this is why people have over time alleged that was an element of jealousy, was it an element of rivalry, because this is the Calcutta Medical College, and the very fact that he was in India, he probably didn't get enough foreign support and endorsement for his work. But the the net result of all of this was that he was.
In fact, he did. The Kyoto University did invite him on 25th January 1979 to attend a closed meeting, and it was an all-paid trip to discuss the details of, yeah, his findings. But the West Bengal government did not allow him to leave the country, and he suffered. Shortly after that, he suffered a heart attack. His request for a special leave was declined. Uh, he had asked for the leave to write up his paper, but that was not given to him.
And he was transferred to the Regional Institute of Ophthalmology as a professor of electrophysiology. I mean, this is a field which is completely alien to his expertise, and he was prevented from presenting his work at scientific meetings. Though in the last previous, he had already attended the science conference in '79, so it's strange, and he was subjected to a lot of humiliating taunts and.
One can only imagine the harrowing time he must have had, especially when if you are working the very institution that you're working for has pulled the rug from under your feet.
And within just 44 days of getting this transfer order, that is to the department, to the Department of Electrophysiology, he is reportedly is said to have written, "I cannot wait for another heart attack." And one tragic day on the 19th of July, 1981, he reportedly hanged himself all alone in his house. And much of his work remained unpublished, not because he did not have data, but he did not get a chance to present his work properly by the administrative ministry in the government. And so all of these, this matters just rested like this at until 1981. So there were these sporadic media reports and conversations then, but his story disappeared. His friend and co-partner in that famous medical intervention, Dr. Sunit Mukherjee, he was somebody out of friendship, out of professional honesty. He actually preserved all of his written work and at various fora continued uh, to reiterate that uh, Dr. Mukherjee had actually helped birth was actually had helped birth a test tube baby. Remember, the complexity in all of this is that the parents haven't officially come out
Yeah,
with.
obviously, in the Indian setting, it is actually quite understandable why the parents would not want to come out and
No, I wonder,
reveal.
I mean, 1981, because they must have realized Joy Brown was a world famous person. So wouldn't another Indian do want to cash in on that?
I guess it was
Because it
not
was
so
such a,
well known. It's not like,
like, again, yeah, I
yeah,
guess cultural differences. But he preserved, he kept talking about this. And eventually in 1986, in a completely different set of circumstances, by a collaboration, and this involved the ICMR's Reproductive Technology Institute as well as the KM Hospital in Mumbai. In August 1986, they reported the first, as it was called, scientifically confirmed test tube baby. He was known as Harsha. And this is when, and the I mean, as far as the official record books go, this was supposed to be the first test tube baby that was born in India. And this process, so this is 1986, so mere 5 years after the death of Dr. Mukherjee. And this process was very formal. There were multiple teams of doctors and scientists, and there was Dr. Anand Kumar from the ICMR, who led who was the project leader of this. And he was widely acknowledged as the as the who as he and
as the
Dr. Induja
legitimate sort of
as the
inventor of
first
the.
Indian who, and there was also equal credit given to Dr. Hinduja, who was an obstetrician at the hospital in Bombay, and they were considered the pioneers
The
of,
Indian
of
pioneers,
IVF.
yeah.
But it so happened that I guess Sunit Mukherjee's perseverance saw to it that he reached out to Dr. Anand Kumar. He gave him all of his published work, all the diaries that he'd maintained, all of the research papers that he'd maintained. And to give full credit to Dr. Anand Kumar, he actually sat through all of his work, he analyzed it, and he was called to deliver something called the Subhash Mukherjee Memorial Oration. So Sunit Mukherjee there were these informal lectures to perpetuate his memory. And it was held in Calcutta in 8th February 1997. But it was at this lecture that he declared that he had, to quote him, "No doubt that Dr. Mukherjee did indeed produce a test tube baby." He said that he and his colleagues were working on their project at the same time as Dr. R.G. Edwards and Patrick Steptoe were working in England. And these groups were oblivious to each other's works. After this lecture, he published a detailed article in Current Science, and it is titled Architect of India's First Test Tube Baby, Dr. Subhash Mukherjee, 16 January 1931. It does not come under any obituary. It just comes under a section called Historical Notes. Now, Current Science is still published by the Indian Academy of Sciences, and it it uh, it publishes scientific research as well as scientific news. And in its 1997 edition was one of its 1997 edition was where T.C. Anand Kumar, who was the director of Institute for Research and Reproduction (ICMR), published these findings.
So imagine, Jacob, it took 16 years for Dr. Mukherjee to get credit for his
And not only
work
that,
of his life.
not only that, I mean, it is quite magnanimous, and I would say, I mean, in the world of very competitive world of scientific, here is this guy, Dr. Anand Kumar, who's featured as the first Indian doctor to pioneer IVF. He willingly says that it was not me, it was this other guy,
I know.
who all.
How many people actually take the badge off from their chest and pin it on someone else, and that too happily so, and then go on to write papers to justify that no, you are wrong, the world was wrong, the world mistreated this guy, and he knew
He did
he
what
was
he
far
claimed to
ahead.
did.
Yeah,
and
he was far ahead.
he not only just repeated, he pioneered an entire new way
Methodology,
of doing
yeah.
this. And after that, of course, everything just became official because the ICMR then put its stamp on it. And in in retrospect, there were a lot of, I mean, there were a whole spate of lectures and honorariums and all of this. I mean, the official history books were rewritten. In fact, Dr. Ankumar himself said that before Harsha was born, or in the time that he was born, there were questions raised in Parliament in the same manner as it was raised in England, the ethics of this and all that. But this was Parliament, and he had a whole institutionalized backing. So in this case, and now, I mean, this, and since this was not just a media sense, it was not reported in the media. This was considered the proper channel. I mean, now here is an accomplished scientist actually giving a stamp of approval to Mukherjee. So things have, obviously changed in massive respect. Though, of course, it was only in 2010 that Dr. Edwards actually got his Nobel Prize. Dr. Steptoe had actually passed by then, and Nobels are not funded for the deceased. But, this was 2010, and I wonder if there was enough effort, put by the Indian government post 97 at least, where, the medical fraternity around the world learned that it was not just Dr. Edwards but also Dr. Mukherjee who rightfully should have probably got a lot of the. In fact, the method of cryopreservation that you just described, it was only officially reported in Nature in 1983. This
Can
was
you imagine?
5 years after he actually wrote about it. Probably he would have got the honors that he deserved then.
So we have come to the end of a very, very tragic story, but a story that really gives hope, as I said right in the beginning, to millions of people, and which has essentially changed the lives of several hundreds and hundreds of couples.
Yeah, and today it is such a complicated and vast industry with its own ethical quagmires of its own. I mean, now you have problems of exploitation, surrogate motherhood. I mean, which is the whole can of worms. Now you're talking about gene editing. I mean, just a few years back, you had this controversy in a
Having a
different light,
designer baby.
having the Chinese scientist Zhuang Ke, who I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly.
I'm sure you're not, but carry on.
But he was accused of of assisting in the creation of genetically engineered babies who are today 5 or 6 years old, and he actually went to jail for that. But very different from Dr. Mukherjee's experience. Today he's out of jail and he's back into research in the Chinese medical establishment. And he was right, because at the end of it he said that I'm now doing research under the prescribed guidelines, but the world is not yet ready for genetic engineering, is not ready for these babies now, but tomorrow it will be a very matter of fact process.
Science is always that. Science is always for tomorrow. And out of 100, I think majority of times the people of today do not understand what the scientists are proposing for tomorrow. Anyhow, Jacob, there are too many things that we can go into, but I think we should stop here. And till we meet the next time, it's goodbye from me, Shobna.
And goodbye from me, Jacob. And we shall see you soon.